Give me a thumbs up on your video. Hopefully all good. Okay, fantastic. You can hear me okay. Great stuff. Okay, well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you very much for everyone for speaking. There's been some pretty damn inspiring stuff today. And thank you again for Claudia for organising this and for getting us all to speak today. So thank you very much, guys. So my name's Greg, and I'll be talking a bit about interactive comics, sharing about my journey, sort of how I went about kind of creating my first interactive comic, giving some advice and kind of best practice when it comes to making an interactive comic and sort of like just mobile comics in general. And finally looking ahead at what the future of comics could potentially be. So with that sort of brief overview, let's get into it. So first section is sort of like a general overview of what I do sort of day to day in my job and how that kind of ties into the comic that I've been working on the last few years. So I'm a senior designer, developer, illustrator. I've been freelance since 2014, so nearly 10 years. But to be honest with you, I've been working in the creative industry since like early 2000s. So I feel like super old. This is kind of back when YouTube didn't exist. Mobile phones didn't have the internet, and social media was basically MySpace, and that was it. So that's kind of like where I'm from, which is like feels like ages ago. So I'm feeling very old right now. And I've kind of seen and experienced a lot of changes in the creative industry during that time. Everything from like the dot-com bubble burst in the late 90s to Flash websites, and then having to scrap Flash websites because everybody was using the iPhone, and rethinking kind of how best to design things for the phone. And growing up, a bit similar to Alex in the first presentation, there's tons of stuff that kind of influenced me as a kid. Anime, cartoons, I'm like a huge Dragon Ball and Akira fan. Massively into kind of vibrant 80s kind of colors, point and click adventure games like Monkey Island, and just like massive fan of music, in particular rock and heavy music, as some of you guys already know. And when I was a kid, I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do for a job. At one point, I actually thought I was going to be a roller coaster designer, but now I actually suffer from motion sickness. So it's actually kind of just a good thing that did not actually happen. So I'm kind of grateful that I'm not a roller coaster designer, but there we go. So my day-to-day kind of job as a designer, this is some of my client work that I've worked on over the years, and I just love variety, and I've been really fortunate to be able to kind of work on a lot of different projects. Everything from kind of campaigns for Jamie Oliver through to kind of fan zone designs for Rugby World Cup. And kind of more recently, last year, I spent about a year or so working on an educational adventure game for a client. And I managed to kind of like convince them to use my style on the game, which is obviously very vibrant at the bottom there, you can see. And so that was kind of a box-ticked moment for me. I've always wanted to make a point-and-click adventure game, and I got to make one, so I was super happy. So I've always tried to incorporate those things that inspire me on the previous slide into my client work, wherever I can get away with it. And over the years of being freelance, I created like a ton of personal projects just to try and attract the kind of work that I want to get into in the future. Being a huge lover of kind of rock and metal, I just started focusing on gig posters, t-shirts, even guitar plectrums you can see on the bottom right corner. Just like fun projects really to try and develop my illustration skills on the side of kind of doing all my client work. And I've still got a few of those plectrums left somewhere. Maybe on the next in-person meetup I might bring a few with me, you never know. And sort of during that time of kind of doing all those little personal projects, I sort of unknowingly started to develop this little universe of characters, which I sort of didn't plan on doing. And it was kind of like, I just kind of made these little characters just to kind of go on my posters and stuff, just to make something visually interesting. I didn't really think anything more about it. But after a few comments from some friends, I decided to kind of think like, how could I try and fit that all together into some sort of universe? So 2020, as we all know, like pandemic hit. I had some extra time, and I'd kind of been writing this sort of loose story on the side since about 2011, just like maybe for a potential comic or a book. I wasn't quite sure what it was going to be. And it seemed sort of like a huge undertaking to do a comic because I'd never really done one, even though I was a fan of manga and anime. I sort of never thought about doing one. So back in 2020, after a bit of work, I did I created a logo and a little teaser trailer as well. And hopefully the sound works, but if it doesn't, then it is what it is. But this is like a very short little teaser trailer I put together in 2020. Yeah, nice one. Great. I'm glad the music worked. Thankfully, all worked. Great stuff. So yeah, so I made that little trailer. I'd never done kind of like anything sort of on that level before with like motion design, 3D, all the rest of it. I was just like, oh, I actually got something really cool. It took a few weeks to get it done, but I got it done. So I finally had sort of a title for this whole thing that I called Riff Reality. I wanted it to kind of like sort of be music themed because I was so into music. So I put riff at the beginning, being riff with guitars and stuff. And I knew that it was going to take me quite a bit of time to create this thing because I was sort of so into it. And I kind of didn't really have the story really finalized at that point. I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do. I just had the title and these little characters. But then sort of October 2020, a few of my friends decided that they were going to do Inktober. Now, I don't know if you guys know what Inktober is. But it's basically posting one thing a day based on different prompts, like whether it be a design, illustration, or whatever it is, a photo. And I thought, well, I'm going to do the same thing. But instead of posting sort of like a design, I'm going to do like a panel a day, and I'll write the caption in the description on social media. And so I did this for 31 days in October 2020, and it was just like such a long haul. I was absolutely exhausted, absolutely knackered by the end of it. I'd never done so much sort of like creative stuff all in one go, and every single day having to show up and post this. It was really, really difficult. And I actually went over the deadline, so I ended up finishing in early November, unfortunately. And so I took a little break because I honestly had burnout. But come sort of February, I knew I wanted to try and incorporate music somehow into my comic. I wanted to get back into it. So I started to look at how I could develop an interactive version of my comic, one that I could use on like mobile phones, one that could be kind of on desktop, and just kind of like just something a bit different, really, trying to make something that animated. And so I took a few months, and April 2021, I finally had like the animated version of my comic ready to release, and put it out there, mainly to kind of friends and stuff. It was like super new. People seem to enjoy it and stuff. So I thought, right, well, I'm onto something here. And I wanted to kind of add some game elements to the comic as well, not just like, animation, but like you go into the comic and like you unlock rewards, you unlock medals and things. I've always loved computer games as well. So I just wanted to try and make some sort of gamified version of this if I could. But the only trouble with that is it was a bit of a barrier to entry, if I'm honest, because a lot of people had to register to be able to get in to actually read the comic. But that's all changed now, which is awesome. So now you can actually go on to riffreality.com and you can actually read the comic now. You don't have to register, you don't have to sign in, you can check it out, which is really cool. So that's kind of like a very brief overview of kind of like what I'm making, the interactive comic I'm making, and kind of my background and my influences and stuff. So that's kind of like the brief overview. Next, we get into kind of like the nitty gritty, a bit of a how-to and advice for interactive comics and mobile comics in general. So first part is kind of like the process really is sort of like ensuring that when you're creating a comic, for me, I feel like we have to try and think of all the different mediums a comic could be, because a lot of us obviously focus on print. We think, comics very traditional. We come from a print first background. That's how it first started. But in all honesty, guys, the trouble is with this sort of way of thinking is like the world has come a long way since print, and the mobile phone, unfortunately, is now the king of content in some ways, and it even overshadows TV. So a lot of creators, we need to try and repurpose what we've done in print, and we try and fit it into this mobile phone, and it's just super hard to read. You have to kind of zoom in, pan around, try and work out following the story. And if we're honest here, it's not the best experience when you're trying to repurpose something for a mobile phone. It's really annoying. So, and just to kind of reinforce that fact, this is a stat which I can't believe, to be honest, but apparently right now there are 16.8 billion smartphones in the world. And this is going to go to 18 billion come 2025. So you can imagine like the attention is on our mobile phones. This is the king of content right now. This is what people are looking at, and I love print and I love printed comics just like you guys. But honestly, we should be spending a bit more time looking at mobile phones as a content consumption. That is where the attention is. And I think if we ignore it, it's potentially quite a big mistake generally as creators. So this is my strategy. And I spoke to Hannah about this just before, and she was like, that's a really long-winded strategy, but it's just the way I do things. Is I create the full panel first. I then adapt it for mobile and desktop, and then I create the printed version at the end. That's the strategy I'm taking. So rather than cropping in with small thumbnails, I'm actually like creating the full panel, as I said, and then moving that down to like the smaller formats, and then thinking about print at the end and how I can reformat it for print and get it to look right. So that's just the way I do it. And that's like, if you're doing a kind of like mobile comic or interactive comic, I would fully recommend kind of doing that. Rather than thinking about the printed side first. But, everyone's different. But drawing the full panel takes longer. Why should I bother doing that? It takes extra time. It's going to take me ages. Well, in all honesty, cropping it later is actually really much easier than redrawing everything later, because can you imagine if I'd have cropped all these things on the left here and then had to go back into my files, redrawing things, trying to work out like where the colors were, all the rest of it. So this is kind of the approach I have. And also, when you're sort of doing things for mobile and interactive, you can think about animations. If I've got the full bit of artwork, I can animate it however I want. I don't have to worry about, is it being cropped or whatever. So, it's a very different process to kind of thinking about printing stuff, 100%. And it's going to save a lot of headaches kind of down the line. So the next little bit of advice I'll give is sort of researching the kind of platforms and the technical aspects of things if you're interested in interactive stuff. So there's several kind of comic platforms out there. You guys may have heard of some of them. One of them is called Tapas. One of them is called Webtoons. And generally, people kind of adopt this mobile-first kind of like a way of kind of like designing stuff. A lot of these kind of platforms adopt that way of doing them. But if we're honest, they're just not very interactive. They don't do much. You'd literally just scroll down the page with a bunch of panels, and it's not very interesting, really, from my perspective. So I was like, well, can I make this a bit more interactive? So a bit of a behind the scenes of how I've done it is basically I've created like this little web app. It tracks kind of in real time the scroll Y position, the direction in which the user is scrolling, and then depending on how they scroll, animates the panels in and works out where the panels are sort of in real time. And that sounds really quite complicated, but it's just checking to see if the panel, if where the person has scrolled to, where the panel has come up, and whether to start some music or to stop some music. It's kind of very sort of, that's the kind of simplified approach I've used, and it definitely works. I'd never tried to kind of build anything like this before, so I was quite pleased with kind of how it turned out. But that's a bit of a behind the scenes of how that works. And so how can you kind of go about doing this yourself? Well, from my perspective, I think even if you try and do this, just give it a go. I know it seems really daunting when we talk about coding and all these things, and obviously we have like a lot of creators here, and it sounds like quite scary. It's a different skill set completely, but just learning the basics of kind of like some HTML, learning a bit of JavaScript animation, and maybe getting some basic web hosting, you could probably come up with something quite similar. Trying to come up with something similar, I think you should give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is, you don't get it straight away, maybe. And what's great is, what I found is that there's actually tons of free resources out there. There's so many coding platforms that are out there for free. There's tons of open source stuff. There's loads of tutorials. So I would definitely recommend, checking out what's out there and just having a go, basically, And the one I use is Phaser, which is on the left, Phaser.js. That's the platform I use. And the reason I chose it is because there's game sort of elements to my comic. So it's having those game elements in there. That's why I chose it. That's the main reason why I chose that particular platform. And so my next thing is sort of like building up to scale down. Building up to scale up and scaling down, basically. It's having a flexible approach to creating your artwork. So if the mobile phone is kind of like the king of content consumption right now, so what's next? It's really important when you're designing stuff for your comic that you're thinking about other devices. How does this fit on a mobile phone, as we've discussed? How does it fit on a 4K TV? Have you ever thought about putting your stuff on a 4K TV before? So mine is actually designed to actually fit on a 4K TV. But it could be that there's other stuff coming down the road in the future, very, very soon. So, speaking of the future, this leads us to kind of like the last section, which is, what is the future of comics? And a bit of a spoiler alert is like, is it actually here already? That's the question. So, the death of printed media has kind of been talked about for years. And as humans, we still consume a lot of information on print. Some of the best ideas written on paper, some of the best art is still hand drawn. Paper is still like one of the best things out there, as human beings. But is augmented reality kind of like going to save print in some ways? So what I've been doing, I've been experimenting with the idea of augmented reality and how that could look potentially on a comic. So this is kind of like a little sample, little video of augmented reality prototype app I've done for my comic, because I'm thinking I'm going to be releasing it in print in the next couple of months. And, I thought it would be the perfect way to kind of bridge the gap between sort of like the interactive world and the printed world. So I can play all my music, I can have my music playing while you look at the comic and stuff, which is perfect because my comic is all about music. And just, it just adds that little bit of extra sort of like interactivity to a printed comic. But the only problem with this is the only thing that's stopping this from being a perfect experience is, it's still on a mobile phone. I still have to hold up my mobile phone to my comic. But the question is, is that all about to change? So our augmented reality headset's going to become mainstream soon. You guys have probably seen a few of these out there talked about from Facebook and all these other big companies. But basically, back in 2007, we had the iPhone launched, and, it completely changed the world. It completely changed the industry, the creative industry as well. We've had so many different devices now. Since then, we've had foldable phones. We've got these huge bulky headsets from Facebook, Sony, HTC. But the problem is really that all these headsets are like really bulky. They're really expensive. Adoption's really low. People don't want to buy them. I'm not going to buy one because it's just too expensive and it's so heavy. But the question is like, is the next Apple product, which is going to be their own headset, is that going to revolutionize the market like they did with the phone market in 2007? Is that going to make it more mainstream? And I think it's something that we as comic creators, we have to really think about this. Like, are those glasses going to come out and are they going to be mainstream? And if that's the case, is this something we need to look at for our comics? Can we make our comics kind of like interactive? Are we going to have to make them interactive at some point soon? And so, if you read all the headlines, who knows what's going to happen? It is supposed to be coming out this year, Apple's version of the augmented reality glasses. But in all honesty, the perfect way, the perfect kind of like Apple glasses are probably at least 4 years away. So if you're a comic creator and you're interested in this stuff, just keep an eye out for what's going on. But I think that's the main thing. I'll answer some questions in a minute. I know I'm talking a lot. I'm just trying to get through it. I'm nearly done. So some final little thoughts. For now, as creators, I do think we should kind of adopt a mobile first strategy, if I'm honest with you. I know everyone's into their print and all the rest of it. So am I. I love print. But, I think augmented reality is probably a few years away, from being mainstream, at least, if we're honest. So mobile phones really are where everyone is looking. Everyone is looking at their mobile phone. Unfortunately, that's just the way the world is right now. Everyone likes to look at their mobile phones. Even on a trip home yesterday, I saw a guy reading a manga on a mobile phone, like literally sat next to me the other day. I was like, wow, that's just insane. And, if you're interested in any of the interactive stuff, please check out like some of these platforms. Even if you're just like curious as to what it is, you don't have to do anything. Just check them out. There's loads of tutorials out there. There's loads of communities willing to help you if you're interested in making something like what I've been making. And just the last bit of advice, just like future-proof your comic. Make your artwork as big as can and as flexible as you can, because you just don't know what's going to be around the corner. Just make it so it can be adaptable to big and small, and who knows, glasses and whatever else people come up with. So what's next for my interactive comic? So I'm releasing the print AR version of the comic, as I showed you guys, in the next couple of months, hoping for a June, July release. And I'm fully underway on working on chapter 1 of the actual comic with, done about 71 panels sketched so far. Started to put together a little printed version, which is like a basic printed version, just to see where the dialogue would fit. And I'm hoping to have the print version done in October and the interactive version done in December. And this is now the last slide, probably the best slide of the presentation, because on this slide I've got 2 cats and 2 animated GIFs. So this is the best slide of the whole presentation. So there we go, I've won there. So I do a little Twitch stream on a Tuesday, 8:30. You know, I do like a bit of behind the scenes. We listen to music together. You can add to the playlist. You can control the lights. We do quizzes, all kind of creative stuff. There's even a cat camera that you can choose to watch the cat if you want. So come and hang out with us on Tuesdays, 8:30 if you guys are free. It's always a fun-packed time. We do like little creator spotlights as well if you're interested. So feel free to come down and hang out with us on a Tuesday. And that's me done now. So thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you all listening and me waffling on. 21 minutes. There we go. I got it done just in time. Perfect.